Hi, guys. When I saw you last time, we were working on ancient Greece and we talked about the time periods and the Greek orders and the golden mean or golden spiral or golden ratio. And today we're going to start with our first Greek item, our first Greek image. And that image is the Athenian Agora. Okay, so we're in Athens. And this Agora, we'll talk about what that is in a second, but this Agora was in use from the archaic times all the way up through Hellenistic Greece. You only have one image here that you need to know, which is the plan, the plan of the area. Agora translates to gathering place. And that is what this is. This was the main gathering place in ancient Athens. It covers a total of 30 acres. So remember, we talk about sometimes using houses off of sweepstakes that are on about quarter-acre lots. So multiply the 30 by 4, and you're looking at about 120 of those houses making up this sort of area. And what its job was, the Agora, was to be a gathering place, to provide an area for the public to gather, and to do what the Greeks are very famous for, which is public discourse, coming together, having discussions about government and art and literature and music and people and drama and all of these things that we really think of. We're dealing with a real democracy here where the people actually have the power, and because people were involved in the government, and people were involved in the running of their city-states. This plaza is at the base of what most people can recognize about ancient Greece, which is the Acropolis. The area, excuse me, I have the hiccups. The area up on the top of the hill in Greece that has like the Parthenon and stuff like that. This Agora provides a place to gather, and then the walkway up to the Acropolis. This plaza had commercial buildings, so places for people to sell their wares and markets and things like that. It had civic areas, so places that would provide or perform governmental tasks. It had religious areas, so temples and places of worship. And it had social areas, just general areas of gathering and entertainment. What was interesting about ancient Greek democracy is that the offices that people held in their government were on rotation, and it allowed there to be not any one person or group of people in power for any really huge length of time. Pericles, we'll talk about him in a little while, was sort of an exception to that rule because he ruled for 30 years. But other than that, we're dealing with an area where there was a real change in leadership frequently. In order to participate in voting, you had to be a citizen, you had to be male, and you had to be from Athens. They had ancient voting machines. They had sort of like checks to make sure that the voting machines worked correctly. They had, all of these laws to protect people's liberties and things like that. And they were really, really believed in equality before the law, regardless of how wealthy you were. So a little bit close to Hammurabi's code. This started out as a commercial area, and then became a governmental area, and then added sacred area, and it it sort of morphed and became multiple different uses. So that's your only image, but I have to, when I teach the Athenian Agora, I have to really sort of teach you the part that isn't here. So we're going to switch to this next slide, and this is sort of like a reconstruction of what it would have looked like. And so you see here's a temple. Here is another temple. Here's another temple, altar of the gods, temple, So here we have sort of that religious area. Then we have this gathering area. While this says altar of Zeus that points here, this gathering area is sort of a collection for sales and selling and the market. Here we have an area for performance. We have more gathering areas here and the library. But what's really important and what you're going to need to think about is this road right here. You come up through this town arch or up this way. You pass through the center of town and you go up this right here, the Panathenaic Way. And the Panathenaic Way, Panathenaic, many gods, the way of many gods, you pass past all these temples, you go up the Panathenaic Way, and you go up to the Acropolis. And so this is the Acropolis. Everybody knows the Parthenon, even if you don't know that's what it's called, most people know it. And here you see that the Agora again. The Agora is down here with the various temples and places, markets and things like that. And then here's that Panathenaic Way up past the altar of the 12 gods, up the hill, up these stairs, past these small entry temples, and up to the Parthenon. So this area up on the hill is called the Acropolis. This gathering place down at the bottom is called the Agora. And your theme is a planned city. And this is going to be really our first example of a fully planned city. We haven't really seen that yet. We've seen pieces of them. We've seen the temple of Amun-Re. We've seen the Apadana. But with that, we only got those single buildings. The Agora is a city planning, not just a single building. And so here we see that. Our next image for today is this work, which is called the Anavasos Kouros. And Kouros means young or youth. And so you're looking at an archaic piece. It's the time period, 530 BCE. This is marble. It has some remnants of paint on it. We have to remember or remind ourselves or learn for the first time that all of these statues that we think of that are this perfectly wonderful, white, beautiful marble would all have been highly, highly painted and decorated. And we don't really think of them that way. And some of the pieces I will be able to show you some examples of their early painting. I don't think I have that for this one. So what we're looking at is sort of the ideal form, and it should remind us a little bit of the Egyptians. Here we have arms close to our side to reduce breakage. We have one leg in front of the other, a very small step, not too much negative space. That space here between where the two legs are, or that space between the body and the arm, there's not too much negative space there. He is about life size. He's 6'4". And he could be compared to, others at the time that we see these other pieces. They were grave markers. That's what their job was. They were meant to mark graves. Prior to this, what would have been used to mark graves would have been large, huge vases that sort of looked almost like gigantic bowls. And these would have been placed at the place of the dead. Sometimes there would have been offerings by their feet. They were definitely influenced by the sculpture program of the Egyptians. But they are more rounded and more a little more natural. The ones that are a little earlier, Kouros statues that are a little earlier, closer to 600 BCE, are a little more blocky, a little more squared. As they get a little older, they get a little more rounded, a little more natural. But we see, very defined cheekbones. We see very defined abs. We see very defined muscles in the legs and in the upper arms. The eyes are wide open, almost sort of a little bit scary. They would have been painted to be staring. They're always nude because we're dealing with a civilization that believed in the perfection of the human body. They sculpted many of their figures nude as a way of honoring the gods for the perfection of the human body that they were given. The inscription on the base tells us who the dead person is, the one leg is always out, but the knees here are locked, and we'll talk about why that doesn't look right. We'll talk about why these arms don't look right. Something about these Kouroses don't look right. And we'll talk about what it is that makes them seem, air quotes, wrong to us in a minute. We see really great examples of the braided hair they would have worn at the time. The hands are clenched. And there are hundreds, if not thousands of these. The Getty Museum in Los Angeles purchased one several years ago, and it was a forgery. I'm not sure if they still have it on display or not, but there are so many that it's kind of hard sometimes to identify what you have. So our next one, in contrast to the Anavassos Kouros, is the Peplos Kouré. So Kouros is a male youth, and a Kouré is a female youth. And she's kind of cool because she's another one of those examples of a work of art that was incorrectly titled. So let's talk about her first, and then we'll talk about what's wrong with the title of her. So she is, again, marble with remains of paint. The paint would have added, realism to her face and to her proportions. And so, we look at her and we notice that, she has the braided hair that the Kouros had. And what we see here on her, it's a lot easier to see on her. Her eyes are wide open. The mouth has what we call the archaic smile. Look at the sort of pinched mouth, odd smile. This is the typical mouth shape for works that were created at this time, and they are specifically referred to as having the archaic smile, the smile from the archaic time period. Her body is very naturalistic in that we have her cinched waist, we see the outline of her breasts, and we're given sort of her face is much more naturalistic. The proportions of her face are more accurate. So we see a couple of things. With the archaic smile, we notice that the smile isn't like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy kind of smile, but sort of like a comfortable smile. What often archaeologists say is a smile that seems to be at ease, just comfortable. It's a very subtle sense of movement, and her arm that's missing, the arm that's missing here, would have been sticking out into that space. It would have, and that's unusual for the archaic period. So that's one of the first things that's kind of weird about her, is that her arm would have been sticking out there. A second thing is that on her head, at the top of her head, there are some drill holes that look like something would have been sitting on her head, probably a crown. Okay, and that again tells us another thing. Kouré is just wrong for that. She doesn't. Why is her arm sticking out? Why would she have had a crown on? There are holes drilled in her ears for earrings, and the Peplos is a rectangular Greek costume that is pinned up on one shoulder. And if you're looking at it, you're going to say, but it's not pinned up on one shoulder. Correct. Yet another place where her name is incorrect. She's not wearing a peplos, a rectangular Greek costume pinned on the shoulder. She's actually wearing what's called a chiton, a chiton, which is a rectangular linen dress that is sleeveless. That's why we don't see any sleeves. That has a belt. And there we see that belt. So actually she's wearing a chiton. So when we look at this, and we see that peplos is the wrong word. We see that arm is stuck out into the space there. We see that her dress is definitely not a peplos and definitely doesn't fit with other female kourés, actual kourés from the time that would have been wearing peplos. She's wearing a chiton. We break all of this down and we realize that actually this is very much not a kouré. This is a god. This is a goddess. It's probably either Artemis or Athena. Too much of it is degraded. We don't have enough to know which of them it is. Because of that hand that's sticking out, there's a good chance that she might have held a bow. Because Athena is the goddess of the hunt. Artemis is the goddess of the hunt. Athena is a warrior goddess. We have those holes in the head that would have had her crown on it. It is most likely that this is either Athena or Artemis. The problem is that, when we have that, when it's been given this name, it's hard to go back and unname them. And we don't have that arm that definitely has the bow in it, but this hand looks like it could have very much held arrows, and that is the belief. Okay, the last one we're going to do today is this thing called the Niobedes Krater. And you're supposed to know both sides of this. And so these are your two images. And the Niobedes Krater is called that because, one, a crater is a giant punch bowl that would have been used to mix water and wine, because unlike the wine of our day, ancient Greek wine was made super, super, super concentrated. And in that super, super, super concentrated, what we see is that the Greeks would make that super concentrated wine and then mix it with water to make it drinkable. If you've read the Odyssey, you remember that scene where Odysseus tricks Polyphemus into drinking the wine that has not been watered down. So that's what a crater would have been used for. It would have been to take that concentrated wine and add it to a container that you could then add water to mix it. So the reason that it's called the Niobedes Krater is that it is believed that this piece and several other pieces were all painted by the same artist, who archaeologists have called the Niobid painter. And the reason that they call him the Niobid painter is it appears that the story of Niobid, which we'll talk about in a minute, is a story that this artist seems to have painted several times. And thus, being Niobid, because he painted this Niobid story several times, he became just known as a way of identifying him as the Niobid painter. We don't actually know what his name is, but we know that he painted a bunch of similar things. So we've moved into that classical Greek period. We're now in 1460, 1450, somewhere in there. And so this would have been made of clay, and then it would have been fired. And this is what's called a red figure technique. That means the whole pot is black and the figures are red, as opposed to the black figure technique where the pot is red and the figures are black. I mean, it's not terribly hard to figure that out. So what's interesting is, so this was found in a place called Orvieto in Italy. You can tell that it has been broken and repaired, but that's okay because it's an excellent example of how it would have been made. Now, this would have been made out of terracotta, which is clay, and it would have been clay with the pebbles removed, mixed with water. Then you allow you mix it with water and you stir it and you allow the impurities to settle and the water to evaporate, and then you take that top section of clay and that is the clay you use to make things with. You wedge it together to remove the air, and then you throw it either on the wheel or you form it with your hands, and then it's baked, and that is how you get this this concept of this pot that we've done before. I just haven't talked about how exactly clay is made, and I just talked to you about that. At the end of this, I'm going to pull up the Khan Academy video on how clay is made in case you want to watch that. So I just talked so fast, I ran out of breath. And so what we're looking at here is this giant crater. And it has two separate stories on it. It has a story on the front and a story on the back. And the stories are very interesting because they show you sort of what was going on or what was popular at the time. So there are two separate stories. First thing you should know when you see these is that usually when there are often gods or goddesses, like they're shown in profile, and then the humans are often shown with full face. And that's an attempt at some sort of perspective. And also you see that some of the figures are in the foreground closest to us, 4, right, the front ground. Some are in the background, and it was an attempt to try to put them at different levels to show perspective. So it's not that this person is down on the ground and this person is floating in the background. What they're trying to show is this person is closest to you, this person is next furthest away, this person is next furthest away. They're trying to show back, middle, and foreground, that we still haven't quite gotten to that yet. There is the stiffness of the form of the classical age. At this time period, in the classical era, things are a little bit, still the forms are a little stiff. So I'm going to show you 2 sides. This is the side that has all these sort of, this guy with the helmet and this guy with the helmet and some other people. And your theme for this pot is, for this crater, is ceramics and art. And narratives in art. So there are several different stories that are possible here. And that is why there are very few times that I say this, but that is why I'm really unhappy that they chose this particular crater. There are lots of craters where the stories that are told in them are very clearly identifiable and it's easy to see what's going on. So these are the names of different archaeologists or art historians. And Giraud believes that this is the story of Jason and the Argonauts, okay, where Hercules, also called Heracles, they deal with the Golden Fleece. Gardner, art historian, believes that this is also about the Argonauts, but this is right after the killing of the king. Hauser believes that this is actually about the Battle of Marathon. And Six believes that this is a story of Hercules or Heracles in the underworld. Those are 4 of the most famous art historians in the world. And all 4 of them have a different example of what it is that is on the back of this. So clearly, I am not going to be able to provide you a specific. But what I can tell you is it's clear that there are humans and gods. It's clear that there are people that are warriors, and it's clear that there's an attempt to show perspective. That's the important part of this side. The other side is super cool. And the reason that the other side is super cool is because the story is a lot easier to tell. Do you have a better picture? Look at how great this is. So this is Artemis. Okay, remember we talked about the Kouros might have been Artemis. So here's Artemis. Okay, here's her brother Apollo. Remember we did Apollo at the Temple of Minerva. So Apollo and Artemis are the children of Leto, Leto, who had an affair with Zeus, and it produced these 2 children. So here's the story that's going on this pot. Let me see if I have a really good picture of this side of the pot, the whole side. I do not. All right, we're going to use this black and white one then. So here we have Artemis, here we have Apollo, and they are in the center, and they are clearly important. And notice in this one, Artemis is wearing a chiton, that same dress that we saw on the Peplos Kouros. So she's grabbing an arrow from her quiver. Apollo is hiding behind this tree. Yes, that's what he's doing. It's an attempt to show landscape. It's one of the early attempts to show landscape, like an actual trees and stuff like that. And what you see is dead person here, person with arrows in him about to be dead. Okay. So what you're looking at, they're all dead. And this is a boy that's covering himself. He doesn't want to be dead, but he's going to be dead too. So what's going on here? Why are Artemis and Apollo killing all of these kids? Well, this is where we get to the story of why this is called the Niobe crater. Okay, so the Niobe crater is the story of Niobe. Okay, she was this, woman who was the daughter of Tantalus. Okay, if you've ever heard tantalizing, you've ever read your stories, he got in trouble and got put in the underworld and all terrible things. So she was the wife of the king of Thebes. And she had, some stories say 12 children, some stories say 14 children. It depends on who you're listening to. But she said to Artemis and Apollo, that she didn't say to Artemis and Apollo. She just constantly talked about how she was the queen of Thebes and how she had 14 children and how clearly she was better than Leto, who had only 2 children. Now, she doesn't talk about the fact that Leto's 2 children, Artemis and Apollo, were the child of a god. But Leto finds out about it, and she gets really upset. And Niobe is like, ha 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 ha. I have 14 children, you only have 2, ha ha ha. And so Leto gets really upset at Niobe for doing this, and she is upset when Artemis and Apollo go to see her one day, and they're like, "Mom, what's going on? Why are you so upset?" And she says, "Oh, it's, Niobe, she was saying again how I only have 2 children and she has either 12 or 14 children." And so what you see here is the scene of Artemis and Apollo killing all of Niobe's children because Niobe had been so mean to their mother. And so what you see here is the scene of the slaughter, where Artemis and Apollo take revenge on the insult to their mother. And so that is the picture that we see here. And apparently the Niobid artist, he enjoyed painting various images from this story. And so it's really cool. I think it's an interesting thing to look at, and it's much better than the other side where you can't tell what's happening. So that is the Niobid crater, and here we see again one more time Artemis with her chiton on, means clearly a chiton, and then we see Apollo holding his cloak so that he can more freely, kill people. And so what I show you here is a sample of what is called the 2 different kinds of, I'm sorry, I accidentally clicked off that. These are the 2 different kinds of craters. So what you see on this side, or, whatever, these pots, this is a black figure pot. And what you see is the figures are in black and the background is red. This is almost the identical story. This is Achilles and Ajax playing dice. This is a red figure pot where the background is black and the figures are red. Okay, so there's a whole reason that you have these images so that you can see the difference between a black figure pot and a red figure pot. Now, if you will stick around, if you want to, you don't have to watch this video, but what we're going to do is we're going to go to this section right here. We're going to go to Khan Academy. And just so you know, the Khan Academy is doing an amazing job of making sure that they have as many articles or videos, for the AP curriculum as is possible. So in addition to my videos, you can always go to Khan Academy, and you can look at it. Khan Academy Greek vase painting is an article. Khan Academy making a Greek vase, Khan Academy amphoras, Greek vase painting. There's so many really cool videos. And if you go to Khan Academy, you can see AP college art history, and every single one of our images, the Athenian Agora, the Anabasis Kouros, the Peplos Kore, all of these things that I'm teaching you are all here. It's a really great way also if you miss a day to watch my video and this video, or if you just really find that you like something that we did, this is another way to do that. So I'm going to show you this video. You don't have to stay for it, but this is how the ancient Athenians would have made vases like what we saw, and also how like the ibex beaker or the sarcophagus of the spouses, they're all made using these similar techniques. So I'll hit this, I'll open this up. I will turn the sound on. Oh dear.
Pebbles and other impurities had to be.
I'm just going to back it up since the sound wasn't on. Sorry, here we go.
Greek vases were made of terracotta or baked clay. Before the clay could be used for pottery, pebbles and other impurities had to be removed. First, the potter mixed the raw clay with water in large outdoor pools to make a thick, silty liquid. This liquid clay stood until the heavier impurities had settled to the bottom. The refined liquid was then drained off into a second pool. The potter repeated this settling process several times. The pool was then left to evaporate in the sun, leaving behind the refined clay. The final step in preparing the clay for potting was called wedging. The potter systematically compressed and folded the clay, making it more malleable and mixing together any parts that may have settled into layers. The clay was now ready for use. Most Greek vases were thrown or formed on the potter's wheel. The complex shapes of Greek pottery often required that a vase be thrown in pieces and then assembled. For example, to make a kylix or cup, the potter first centered the clay on the wheel. When it stopped wobbling, the potter began a central hole. Pressure from the potter's fingers inside the hole gradually widened this opening and formed the bowl of the cup. Aside from the wheel, the potter's main tools were his hands, although a wet sponge was often used to smooth the surface. To make the foot of the cup, the potter again centered the clay, drew it up, and then hollowed out the stem. The next day, when the formed pieces had dried slightly, the bowl of the cup was trimmed with a metal shaver and received a final smoothing. The potter used wet clay to bond the separately made bowl and foot and then smoothed over the join. Next, the potter stretched out lengths of clay and bent them into handles. Again using wet clay, the potter attached the handles to the bowl, often roughening the joining surfaces to increase the bond. The vase was now ready to be decorated. Athenian vase painters experimented with a number of different methods of vase decoration. To create a vase in the black figure technique, that is, with black figures against a red background, the vase painter first sketched the outline of the design, in this case a dolphin, onto the surface of the vessel. Then, using a highly refined liquid clay as paint, the vase painter filled in the outline, creating a silhouette. When applied, the clay paint was almost the same color as the surface of the vase, but with firing, it would turn black. The vase painter next used a sharp point to scratch internal details through the silhouette. The vase was then ready for the kiln. The contrasting red and black color scheme of Athenian pottery was the result of a difficult three-stage firing process. Using wood-fired kilns or ovens, vases were heated to about 800 degrees centigrade in an oxygen-rich environment, causing the whole vase to turn red. Next, the potter closed off the vents of the kiln and added green wood and leafy branches, creating an oxygen-poor environment. As a result, the whole vase turned black. At the same time, the kiln temperature was raised, causing the thin, painted layer of decorative clay to become glossy and non-porous. Finally, the kiln was allowed to slowly cool, and the potter reopened the vents, letting oxygen into the kiln again. In this stage, the unpainted areas of the vessels returned to their warm red color, but the glossy areas, which could not absorb oxygen, remained black.
All right. So if you stuck around, that is how ancient Greeks made pots, and that applies to so many of our pieces that we will see. And just while I'm here, remind you that this is a really excellent resource for you. Arts and the Humanities at Khan Academy, they actually have one for World and APUS. And so if you scroll art history, here's our stuff, and AP art history, this is actually us. And they have all of our units. Middle, all of them, you can see them down the side here. So global prehistory, we're in the middle of ancient Mediterranean, and they have all of the units that we will do during the course of the year this year. So it's a really great resource for you. I hope you had a good time, and I will see you next time.